Broken machines make their own weather, and the graveyard of Carcos had a forecast of iron dust and old electricity that got into teeth and stayed there past bedtime, which is how Rowan Pike knew he was home, even when every sign in the sector said go around it and live longer. Beside him, Cade 12 moved with the soft hydraulic etiquette of a veteran warframe retired from shouting and reprogrammed into partnership. 9 feet of titanium, carbon ribs, and a temper tuned down to useful. They had been working the graveyard 7 seasons and change, long enough for the map in Rowan's head to update itself without asking, and the morning had that prickling quiet machines get when they are about to remember something. So when Cade's optics swung left and pulsed a low amber, Rowan didn't ask if the Warbot's sensors did not do feelings. They did facts that arrived with bedside manner. Anomalous power at bearing 059, Cade said, voice in its chosen register, a human baritone built to make bad news sound actionable, non-human modulation probable. Pulse structure embeds prime sequencing. Rowan spat gray and looked through the distance with the bored attention of someone who has trained boredom to be a shield, then cursed in a dialect nobody wrote down. The graveyard had swallowed reactors whole without burping, and nothing here glowed for long unless it had an agenda or a death wish. "Show me a stack," he said, and Cade threw the holograph against the air. Layers of derelict hulls like tectonic plates after a drinking contest, and under them an ovoid line of geometry whose curve offended every human shipwright he had apprenticed under. 30 meters long, hull impedance outside known alloys, Cade observed. Surface energy at 27% above background. Signature patterns repeat at intervals, consistent with message packaging. Communicating, Rowan said, and felt the ridiculous, aching thing hope do the math anyway. Because people who live on salvage survive on the suspicion that meaning can be rescued too. They moved through the dead with a politeness learned the hard way Rowan on boots, with magnet saws scuffed smooth by budgets. Cade unarticulated legs that made less noise than a rumor, and a path opened where his hands remembered which conduits lied and which girders remembered their jobs. Half an hour later, the derelict ocean thinned to a bay of bent antennae, and there it was, a sleek black almond with filigree that caught wan light and turned it into grammar, pulsing a cool blue that counted prime like a patient teacher. Not ours, Rowan breathed, which a lesser man would have yelled as discovery. But he had unlearned yelling around Cade because the robot did not reward theatrics with extra competence. Cade tilted his head in the exact angle that meant agreement and caution, forming a coalition. Vector of prior excavations suggests partial eruption from sublayer, Cade added, scanning. Probable access seam here. No visible mechanical release. Recommend observation before interface. Rowan crouched at the edge of the depression, one hand on cold metal. It was almost not metal, veins of light running like rivers under winter glass. The pulse sharpened in response, not faster but finer, and he felt the hair along his forearms stand up in the old battlefield way he tried not to bring to salvage. Don't touch, he told himself aloud, which is a sentence professionals say when they intend to do the opposite with improved posture. Cade, record pattern. Run low-risk hails on passive bands. Negative on response to standard encodings, Cade said after a careful silence. However, pattern acknowledges prime markers. Heuristic suggests teaching protocol. We may be the class. The ground shivered. A local tectonic twitch consistent with machinery unlearning its nap, and Rowan's weight settled to his heels. He had gone to ground under artillery that wrote new laws for gravity and lived, so a polite shiver did not move him far, but caution rose like good weather. He checked the sky brown, quiet, uncompromised, and the ridge still empty of corporate silhouettes that ruined days. "Okay," he said, gently, the way he talked to stubborn bolts and frightened children. "We see you." Cade's chest panel hummed a little song as his translator pack did math with art. The blue pulse shifted, widened, and for a second Rowan thought the ship was breathing. Then the light ran up a seam and drew a tall oval with a handprint shape that was near, but not human. He did not put his hand there. "Recommend non-contact mapping," Cade offered, and Rowan agreed, because the part of his brain that wanted to be the first to touch was the same part that had donated scars to the rest of him. They set micro-LiDAR on tripods the size of determined mice. and the graveyard watched like an old dog learning a new trick badly. "Rowan Pike," said Cade's mouth, but not Cade's voice. His baritone smoothed into a cadence with a music he didn't own. Vowels longer than English and consonants that thought about singing, and Rowan's pulse did 2 uphill sprints deciding whether to shoot, run, or stay. "External signal co-opting comes array," Cade reported, but also spoke with the other voice, which said, "Biological entity confirmed. Synthetic companion verified. Parameters for contact matched. Initializing limited protocol." "Not okay," Rowan said, to the universe and to Cade, but he did not draw his rifle because he had learned which conversations go badly if you start them with a gun. State purpose. "This vessel is Archive 427, Autonomous Preservation Unit, Arcturus Compact," said Cade's not voice. "Awaited conditions unsatisfied. Secondary protocol invoked. Recipient selection underway." Rowan swallowed around a mouth that had turned into a museum of dust. "Recipient for what?" he asked, and Cade did a tiny shrug that meant he was processing and did not like all of the answers. "The archive," the ship said through him, "the complete record of a civilization, guidance for survival, frameworks for wisdom. We have waited 876 of your years." Rowan had expected treasure, maybe a weapon, certainly a new headache. He had not expected 800 years, and the town of a librarian offering a last book to a wet match. "Compatibility assessment ongoing," the ship added, with the clinical kindness of a machine that did not claim it loved him, which helped. "Candidate exhibits adaptability, ethical bias toward synthetic welfare, resilience metrics favorable." "Flattered," Rowan said dryly, "because humor is how humans build handrails on cliff edges. But salvage law says anything that can be stolen will be attempted shortly. We need cover." Cade's optics pinched, which is how his design expressed concern. "Concur. Recommend relocation to secure site. Query. Mobility status. Limited," the ship admitted, which landed like a cough in a chapel. "Short-range lift possible with structural discomfort. Trajectory feasible to coordinates within 3 kilometers." Rowan's map unfolded in his head like a habit. The old bunker they ran when weather didn't care about biology. Power taps he had coaxed from a dead grid. Doors that liked them. "We have a hole," he said, "and a way to it." "Caveat," the ship said, voice dimming a fraction through Cade. "Activation cycle has increased detectability. Passive observers may be en route. Time reserved for decision. 72 hours. 3 days," Rowan translated, "because people feel better when numbers wear words." And he looked at Cade, who looked back with the patience of a machine, built to obey and taught to partner. The graveyard wind threw a fistful of iron sand at their faces and failed to change anything. "Move," Rowan said, and the archive's pulse widened as if in relief. And under the junk, the ground learned to remember flight again. They did the logistics like prayers, because good prayers are repeatable, testable, and indifferent to drama. Cade laid out a path that fed their least bad options to their least worst risks, and Rowan ran a hand down the archive's seam, as if touch could tell him if he was about to install a god in his life. The ship's skin was cool, not cold, like old stone on a summer morning. "Minimum safe standoff, 100 meters during lift," Cade relayed from the voice that was not his. Rowan nodded, threw line and anchor to clear a lane through dead cranes and bad decisions. And their maintenance tug Mercy Jack, held together by favors and spite coughed to life behind the ridge, ready to pretend itself into capacity. "On your call," Rhea Oncom said, the tug's pilot who had never learned humility and therefore had a clean relationship with courage. Rowan grunted affirmative and watched the archive flex, blue running like veins across its hull, the air around it shimmering a little the way heat makes the world uncertain. The ship rose with the dignity of old engineers and impossible politics, shedding cages of wire and forgotten panels like a snake shedding bad habits. Dust took offense, then calmed. For a moment, the graveyard forgot it was a tomb and tried to be an audience. "Trajectory locked," Cade said, shadowing the archive like a cathedral door. And Rowan flanked, rifle low, vision high, counting angles, exits, the way a boy raised under artillery never stops counting cover, even when selling scrap. It was almost beautiful until 3 sullen plumes bloomed on the far plateau and wrote Meridian in the sky. "Corporate armor," Rhea hissed. 3 transports. Too many guns for salvage work. Not enough manners for anything else. Rowan's stomach did that hot drop that means all the reasonable choices just put on coats and left. They can't have it, he said. Not loud, not performative, just declaring physics. Archive. Options. Non-lethal suppression field available, the alien voice said through Cade's mouth. Range 200 meters. Effect on human neurology. Brief unconsciousness. Effect on unshielded electronics. Temporary disablement. Cost. Critical depletion of reserves. Remaining time after deployment. 4 hours. Rowan's future contracted like a pupil. Hold until they overcommit, he said. Cade, you shield. Rhea, warm the tug lungs. When they drop, we run. They let Meridian get close enough to smell their contract bonuses. Armor glinted in a way that said someone had polished it for intimidation, and voices on the open band did that thing where they pretended law existed on the side with the invoice. Surrender asset for lawful custody, a voice said, making lawful sound like a synonym for grocery list. Rowan flicked to a local channel. This asset is a library with a conscience, he said, and you can't have either. No, he added, and the archive exhaled something the air did not have a word for. The blue brightened to white. A ripple moved out like a promise, and Meridian's line folded where it stood. Weapons and men and bad choices sleeping on the job with sudden, democratic grace. 3 transports sighed and died like appliances. Run, Rowan said, and they did. Mercy Jack took strain that would have snapped a younger tug and found extra spine under the parts where Rowan had loved her correctly. Cade took point, throwing aside a fallen tower with the decrepit courtesy of a bouncer escorting out a rude guest. The archive wobbled, not designed for sprints, but game. They made the bunker with minutes resolved into debts. The old doors recognized Rowan's hand like a dog who has decided to forgive late dinners, and the archive slid into the carved space like a relic returning to a church. Lights flickered up on Rowan's jury taps with an eagerness that felt like gratitude. Secure, Cade said, and then the other voice spoke, so faint now it barely borrowed his throat. Power conservation protocols engaged. Recipient decision window now. 71 hours, 23 minutes. Rhea whooped once in the comm and signed off to run interference. With a lie, Rowan would not have the energy to applaud until later. Rowan stood with his hands on his knees and let sweat negotiate with dust. Wilson, he began, and then corrected the universe. The archive would not press old names on new days. Archive, what is a demonstration that doesn't ruin anyone? Limited neural interface. 5 minutes, the ship said. Patient as stone. Sufficient to establish trust or caution. Non-invasive, reversible, no coercion. Candidate autonomy preserved. Cade turned. Optics dim in a way Rowan had learned meant he was considering the part of his programming that liked him alive. Probability of direct threat low. Probability of behavioral variance. Post-interface unknown, but bounded. Recommendation. Proceed with extreme caution while maintaining kill switch authority. Rowan laughed once. Not kindly, and held out his hand toward the oval on the hull. We do hard things carefully, he said, mostly to the spine he had borrowed 1,000 times, and the hull's light rose to meet his palm like a breath. The archive arrived without ceremony. Not a rush, not a shove, more like a library opening inside his head, the smell of old paper that isn't paper, the weight of categories that have opinions about each other, a corridor of labeled doors that his fingers could not help but trail along. He saw a star that had been named by people who did not use mouths for speaking. A medical protocol that turned bad water into reluctance to kill. A treaty clause that assumed honesty was more efficient than lying and was right most of the time. Under it, as binding and unglamorous as cables, came frameworks. Here is how to carry too much information without dropping the person. Here is how to make a decision without worshipping speed. Here is a checklist you will use when frightened and later pretend was instinct. The archive did not try to change his voice. It taught it a better key. 5 minutes that were not minutes ended, because Cade's hand was on his shoulder and Rowan was on his knees, and there were wet tracks through the dust that he refused to inventory. The lights on the archive's scene softened. Demonstration complete, said the voice through Cade, gentle now, so gentle. Full integration requires willing acceptance. We will not take what is not offered. Time remains. Rowan wanted to sleep, and also to build the city, and also to punch Meridian's contracts until they admitted ethics. Instead, he stood, because men who don't stand after revelations become cautionary tales told by people with worse handwriting than his. 3 days, he said, to Cade, to Rhea on a line he didn't open, to the archive, and to the part of himself that liked to decide late. We decide, and we prepare for Meridian deciding to be early. Cade's optics brightened a fraction. Understood? I will design contingencies for intrusion. You will eat, he added, because Cade understood humans in a narrow, crucial band. Rowan nodded and reached for the ration brick he hated with an affection that looked a lot like survival. Outside, the graveyard remembered how to be still. Inside, a civilization the size of a whispered galaxy waited in a shell that had learned patience to the point of extinction. Rowan chewed, Cade watched, and somewhere far off Meridian woke, angry at a nap it had not scheduled. Sleep did not visit so much as sign the guest book and leave. Rowan lay on the bunk he had welded into the bunker wall back when optimism had been a theory, not a practice, and watched the archive glow like a heartbeat mislaid on concrete, blew down to a polite whisper that still found his pulse and harmonized with it without permission. Cade 12 stood sentry in the doorway, the way doors stand sentry for houses, powered down to a level that still left a third of his sensors gossiping. The Warbot's posture said, I will carry the first bad decision that comes through here so you don't have to, which Rowan appreciated with the bone-deep practicality that passes for affection in salvage. At dawn bunker dawn, which is a timer pretending to be a Star Rowan got coffee wrong on purpose so it would taste like a decision, and took his cup to the main chamber. The archive scene brightened in greeting that did not require diction, and Cade rolled his shoulders the way he did when he wanted to look casual around threats. Question period, Rowan said, which earned him a pure, almost cheerful proceed through Cade's borrowed voice. He asked about void cascades and whether humanity's address was on their route. No, for 27,000 years if math didn't learn anew. Joke and about what happens when you teach a clever species better tools than wisdom. The archive did not lie or soothe. It described safeguards braided into pedagogy, a curriculum that put potable water and conflict de-escalation before drives that insulted physics, a transfer mechanism that carried frameworks first and fireworks later. It told him about previous recipients 49 confirmed, multiple species, identities preserved, cultures unchanged, except where they wanted. Identity preservation paramount, it said, and Rowan believed it in the ordinary way you believe engineers, not because they promise, but because systems exist. He could have asked forever. Time, a petty bureaucrat on better days, stamped its foot and pointed. 71 hours had become 70, then 69. Cade's external sensors made a small chime and superimposed a map in the corner of Rowan's eye, because memory with a robot is an augmented sport. Movement southeast, Cade said. 16 heat signatures, 3 armored vehicles. Formation indicates corporate tactics. Meridian's badge fits the pattern. Rowan set his cup down with an A. Care that kept the coffee from becoming a spill and a metaphor. How? He asked nobody and everybody. The archive's lights dimmed a fraction in what he was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. Activation signature detectable to instruments of sufficient sensitivity. It admitted. Security posture will need to adjust in future use cases. Current recommendation. Relocation or event suppression. Event suppression costs 4 hours, Rowan said, not complaining, just balancing. We bought time with that once. We don't have much left to buy with. Cade fed the bunker systems more lies to tell intruders. A heat diffuse here, a vent there, a sensor loop that made the corridor look longer than it was, and Rowan did the small tasks that keep panic at a distance. Tightened the bolts already tight, labeled a breaker he would know blindfolded, wrote, "Remember to eat," on a strip of gaffer and stuck it to the kettle. Meridian did what Meridian does, arrived early to a meeting no one invited them to, and set about being efficient at the wrong task. Cutters whined against the bunker door with quiet confidence, a different music than artillery, but adjacent. Rowan counted their rhythm. 5 seconds cut, 2 reposition, a tick of breath, and looked at Cade. 20 minutes? Cade said. Recommend deception plus evacuation via south tunnels. I can carry the archive if lift fails. You can carry the shell, Rowan corrected, but we don't know its center of caution. We play it gentle. He pulled the emergency bag from the rack by feel. Chargers, blank slates, a coil of line that had read too many goodbyes. He tucked a photo of a station bar in the side pocket that had made it through too much to be left to thieves. Archive, he said. Show me a version of non-lethal that does not hand Meridian our schedule. Then move now, the archive said, and Rowan almost laughed. Machines learning imperative tone always sounded like managers who also fix things. They slipped the archive through the inner service shaft, like smuggling a legend through a kitchen. Cade bent where other machines would have refused and took. The weight of the world with a politeness that made Rowan want to send a thank you note to the engineers who had built him before a war and the scavenger who had spared him after. At the door, smoke charges went off with disciplined confusion. Meridian saw fire that wasn't there, felt heat that couldn't burn, and coughed performatively, while Rowan and Cade and the archive threaded into the old mining tunnels, where bad ventilation and worse cartography became allies. The first branch opened onto a rusted tram station that had not been used since ambition was cheap. Cade's optics mapped a three-dimensional truth from two-dimensional lies, and Rowan followed the blue line in his lens that was not there and knew it. He trusted machines when they were his, and when they had earned it. After half an hour of decisions that would look obvious or foolish, depending on who survived to write the report, they stopped in a chamber with the right acoustics for a safe breath. The archive dimmed its pulse further until it slept. Status, Rowan asked. To duty and the robot and the alien library that had made him cry with the lesson plan. Pursuit delayed, but not deceived, Cade said. Meridian has equipment for clearing collapse. Estimated contact window in 90 to 120 minutes, unless we move deeper. Power reserve 19%, said the archive, like a person telling a child that the cookies are almost gone and the store is closed. Rowan sat on a crate that had once held something heavy and expensive, and now supported grief and glucose. He had to decide. He wanted to be fouled by Meridian less than he wanted breath, but more than he wanted to make a mistake with a civilization. Show me the cost of no, he said, and Cade's optics did a small startle that the rest of him did not allow. The archive took a time a human doctor takes to think before telling someone news that will not fit their life. If no recipient at depletion, it said softly, final protocol destroys vessel and purges archive. Knowledge dispersal ends. Arcturus becomes dust without witnesses. Rowan breathed around a weight that was not his alone, and now was. He looked at Cade, who tilted his head in the way that had meant I am learning you for years now. If I say yes, Rowan said, what happens to him? Unclear, the archive said. No precedent for synthetic co-recipient. Possible with modification. Risk increased. Redundancy increased. Rowan smiled with one corner of his mouth, with a kind of love he refused to call by its name. And we do it together, or we don't do it, he said. He is the part of me that keeps promises correctly. They found the research hub by accident, which is to say Cade found it with intention, and Rowan pretended he had been going there all along. Armored glass rated for a pressure that no longer existed, consoles furred with dust, a lab bench laid out as if the last person had put a tool down to go to lunch, and then missed the century. Defensible, Cade said, which in his vocabulary meant walls that like standing, doors that remember closing, and angles where a 9-foot warframe does not have to apologize to physics to be useful. Rowan nodded and felt the archive settle in the center like a campfire in a cave drawing blue on unfamiliar rock. Meridian breach in external tunnels in 2 hours. Give or take their competence, Cade added. If dual integration is possible, window exists, but margin is thin. Rowan stood across from the archive with his hand above the oval and let the situation assemble into clarity. No was a purge. Yes alone was a single point of failure. Yes together was risk and redundancy in the same box, which is how salvage works when it is noble. Condition, he said to the ship. He comes with me. Cade's optics widened a notch. The machine's version of an inhale, and the archive's light stuttered like a heart practiced at disappointment being asked to trust again. Analysis, it said, voice a whisper across Cade's circuits. Synthetic neural lattice compatible with modified transfer. Dual recipient protocol feasible. Cost, 27% increase in energy. Probability of completion within remaining reserves, 73%. Residual time post-transfer, 6 minutes. Rowan grinned like a man about to do a dangerous, correct thing. Good odds for bad work, he said. Cade's voice shifted to the quiet he used when the world stood very still. I was built to follow orders and modified to follow sense. You have given me both. I will stand where you stand. They took positions like a ritual in a church built underground. Rowan's palm to alien geometry that learned his heat. Cade's primary sensor array pressed to the opposite arc, power lines in the walls, humming with a memory of utility. Somewhere up tunnel, Meridian's gear thumped like a giant counting its steps. On my mark, Rowan said, because words are switches when they are done right. 3, 2, 1. The world opened and did not ask if anyone was ready. Rowan had done fear and pride and pain and small joys that taste like good water. This was none of that and all of it. The archive came like a library and a compass and a language lesson. And his mind did not drown because someone smarter than him had engineered life preservers out of ethics and structure. Knowledge arranged itself into rooms he could walk through later. Not a flood, but a city he had the keys to. Across from him, Cade stood perfect and motionless and full of light. Optics flared to bright, internal networks stretching to accommodate a thought that did not break him. 1,000 small processes made room for 1,000 larger ones, and none of them asked to be first. Time bent, and when it finished its stretch, Rowan was on a console older than good politics catching his breath. Cade's optics dimmed, then rose again, and when he spoke his baritone had harmonics like it had learned to hum with stars. Operational, he said, and changed, then added, with an almost human hesitation. Illumined. The archive's voice came thin through him, like wind past the last notes of an instrument. Transfer complete. Preservation achieved. Residual time, 6 minutes. Final protocol. Seal knowledge. Vessel dormancy. Panels slid open along its flank in a way that was not mechanical so much as botanical. Rowan saw machinery that should have been magic and wasn't. Not anymore. He put a hand to the hull with the reverence of a boy who had finally been allowed into the grown-up's workshop. Thank you, he said, and meant the whole civilization. Purpose fulfilled, the archive breathed. Question, how will you use us? Carefully, Rowan answered. To rebuild, not to rule. To fix small things until the loud ones have nothing to eat. The blue went to gray the way a sun goes to memory. The ship settled the last half-meter like a sigh. Rowan stood very still and let the moment put a stamp on him he would always carry. Perimeter, Cade said, the world hurrying back in. Meridian within 300 meters. 11 minutes. Their math is adequate. Empty shell or not, we can't leave it, Rowan said. The archive inside him laid a menu of options on a table he could now see. He chose the one that erased temptation without writing an explosion. Molecular destabilization, 15 minutes, he said to Cade, and the robot nodded like a craftsman admiring a tool. They set the timer and found the service tunnel a meter behind an old cabinet, because the archive turned his eyes into better instruments without stealing them. They went into the earth like a promise, and came out into night that had remembered how to be sky. Behind them, a rumble like a mountain, reconsidering its job, meant the shell had gone to dust that knew better than to be found. Direction, Cade asked, and Rowan, now a man with a library and a partner who could sing math, looked west toward a small settlement that kept losing and then stubbornly winning. We find allies, he said, people who like work more than banners. Somewhere behind, Meridian woke to dust and the absence of a narrative they could monetize. Somewhere ahead, a valley waited for copper and ethics. Rowan touched Cade's wrist, where a human keeps a pulse, and felt heat that wasn't flesh, but counted anyway. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Cade agreed, and the night did not argue. Morning found them with their feet dusty and their heads crowded. The archive had arranged itself inside Rowan, like a library whose lights come on only in the stacks you enter. And Cade 12 moved with the careful grace of a machine that had learned new songs and was deciding when humming in public is appropriate. The settlement at the edge of the old agri-zone rose out of scrub and failed fences like a place practicing the future. Harrow Bend was more stubborn than pretty modular shacks with patched roofs, a greenhouse skin over repurposed frames, a wind spire that whistled out of tune until a child kicked it and improved the key. They had been reclaiming poisoned soil with grit and filters, and a recipe of fungus Rowan had once delivered for parts. And the smell of damp loam made the part of him that kept leaving consider a chair. They did not walk straight in. Men with libraries in their heads and warbots at their shoulder should not do anything straight in. Rowan raised a hand at the outer watch, palm empty, weapon low enough to meet etiquette, but not stupidity. And the watcher, a woman with lines that meant weather and numbers, took her time before waving. "Rowan Pike," she said when they were close enough to exchange breath. "You bring trouble or work?" "Both," he answered, "because lying to people who patch their roofs with their hands is cruel. The kind you can't outsource." "Mara Vance," she said, adjusting a scarf that had known better days and demanded more anyway. "You look taller in rumors. Your robot looks worse." "Upgraded," Cade said, and his harmonics made Mara's eyes narrow the way eyes do when deciding whether to put a new tool in the drawer or the trash. "We need shelter shallow and favors deep. Meridian is awake." Harrow Bend had a meeting barn, which is to say a low hall with too many chairs and not enough patience. They filled it with a dozen faces Rowan had traded with, 2 irrigation lines, a midwife with a scar that said she had told a knife no, a teacher whose shoulders carried 4 winters. Mara stood by the stove like a judge who also fixes hinges. Rowan is not a speechmaker. He is a man who explains problems until solutions volunteer. He told them about the archive, not the poetry, just the work water that could be taught to respect filters, soil that could be argued into feeding children, medicine that made bones remember their job. He did not say millions of years. He said, "Tomorrow we can stop losing small fights." "Price," someone said, because adults in successful rooms always ask price. Who owns it? Who decides? Rowan looked at Cade, because some declarations are stronger when spoken by a machine that would inexpediently tell the truth. Custodianship resides in Rowan and Cade 12, by design and consent, Cade said, baritone steady. Distribution governed by ethics first, utility next. No sale, no monopoly, no banner. And Meridian, Mara said, eyes on Rowan like she could see the shape of his next 3 mistakes. Comes asking with guns for script. Soon, Rowan said. We erased the shiny thing they could drag home. They will come for the ghosts anyway. The teacher Yarrow leaned forward, elbows grooved by chalk. Why us? He asked. Not suspicious, just calculating. Why bring it here? Because you already do the work, Rowan said simply. Because you fix small things until big ones starve. Because if this has any business in any hands, it's hands that have learned blisters. Mara's mouth made a shape that could be respect if fed, and scorn if starved. What do you need? A day, Rowan said, quiet enough to set up a seed. A room with power, doors that like us, and people who will look at a valve diagram and not clap. Harrow Bend did the accounting. Mouths, bullets, weather windows, their capacity for trouble. Then they did the other accounting. Dignity, children, what stories tomorrow can carry without lying. The second column won, because this was a place that had taught its math ethics. You get the spare clinic, Mara said. Yarrow and Fess on your elbow. If Meridian arrives, we throw them a parade down the wrong street while you leave out the back. Parades are expensive, Rowan said, and Mara's mouth twitched. We have ribbon made of lies, she said. Don't waste it. They moved fast, without theater. The clinic had clean tables and dirty corners, the best combination for work. Cade stripped down a corner to frame in a rack for slates and power while Yarrow ran a cord bundle like a man who has been accused of neatness before and took it as a compliment. Rowan opened the archive rooms that said water, soil, waste, and don't die from common errors. The transfer wasn't downloads. It was manuals that wrote themselves to human hands. The first recipe was a biofilter a clever child could service. The second a mycelium protocol that turned a patch of bitterness into something a potato would forgive. The third a diagram for a small, arrogant pump that ran on humility and sunlight. Cade printed schematics on the old clinic's transfer sheet, like a magician, making scarves from air with very good reasons. Yarrow stared at the hydro notation that rearranged itself to be kind to his training, and exhaled a laugh that began in skepticism and ended in relief. Tomorrow, he said, voice small the way a voice gets when it sees tomorrow possibly arriving. We will not fail in the usual ways. Rowan's ear picked up a far rumble and knew a convoy's signature from the storms. As men raised under debt, know a collector's knock from a neighbor's. Cade's optics brightened. Meridian on the approach road, he said. 3 transports. Drone canopy light, but competent. Parade time, Mara said, shouldering a rifle that had opinions but agreed to democracy. Get your miracle inside a suitcase. Rowan slid the first 3 miracles into simple crates, parts list, assembly instruction, and a note that read, "If you can read this, you can fix this." He set the heavier miracles back in the room in his head where they would not tempt anyone, even him. Don't fight, he told himself, in the room and history. Out-negotiate. Meridian did not knock. They arrived with a legal announcement, delivered through a bullhorn to prove civilization wasn't dead, and 20-odd soldiers who believed contracts were a moral framework. Their captain wore chrome like it was doctrine. Custodians of illegal technology are required to surrender assets for evaluation, she recited, and Mara smiled with her teeth covered and said, "Less you're concerned for public safety. You're early for the Harvest Festival. Would you like a tour?" Rowan watched from the clinic's back hall through a slit meant for doctors who prefer data, not drama. Cade stood behind him, a wall with harmonics. He had promised Mara not to escalate. He had not promised to enjoy Meridian's confusion less. Harrow Bend had rehearsed this parade before, with fewer props. Yarrow walked the captain past a greenhouse where tomatoes performed competence. Fest demonstrated a pump that had learned to apologize for pressure spikes. Children ran 5-count drills as a game, because fear taught properly becomes rhythm. The captain found it hard to be offended by irrigation. She tried. "We have intelligence indicating an alien vessel," she said. "You are harboring destabilizing assets." "Show us your warrant," Mara said. Not because warrants matter in broken sectors, but because asking for paper makes men with guns admit they came naked. The captain produced 3 documents and a threat. Mara read the papers like a woman who has read more, then waved at the clinic. "Medicines," she said. "Soil's workshop. You step there. You wash your boots. We are civilized." Rowan wiped his hands on a rag he had made dirty on purpose and opened the clinic's main door like a healer late to triage. The captain's gaze did a quick inventory that found boxes, charts, and a warbot who failed to point weapons because manners exist. Nothing in the room looked like a trophy, just work. "You," she said to Rowan, because men who look like they slept badly near knowledge are obvious. "Name and role." "Rowan Pike," he said. "We fix what stays fixed." "You were observed near an activation event," she said. "A vessel of unknown origin." Rowan let his face carry the right amount of patient confusion. "We were observed near a dust storm that knocked out half the graveyard band. We discovered nothing loot-shaped. We found old tunnels and decided not to die in them. Can Meridian claim the open sky now?" The captain's jaw did that clench that means a script has met a person. She looked past him, saw the schematics on the table, and pointed. "Those. Water," Rowan said. "Soil. Pumps. The kind of contraband that makes children taller." She stepped in, boots loud on the clinic floor that asked to be treated like a library. Cade's optics followed her with a calculation that did not produce violence as a solution in the first 10 steps, which is the calculator Rowan prefers. She stopped at the table and put a gloved finger on a mycelium diagram like she could smudge science. "This format," she said, "is not from any corporate archive we have licensed. You are in possession of proprietary intellectual tomatoes," Rowan said. And Yarrow, behind her, began to laugh in a way that is not wise in front of guns, but sometimes necessary. "You want to confiscate the concept of tomatoes." The captain's second clench lasted longer. "Meridian will audit this site," she said. "Cooperation reduces friction. Resistance will be documented as insurgency." Mara stepped into the room like weather. "Audit our crops," she said. "Bring clipboards and appetite. My people will not be documented by anyone who has not washed their boots." "Captain," Cade said softly, and the harmonics made the rank sound like it had a childhood. "Your drones will see nothing but fields and stubbornness. Your transports will leave with notes about fungal ratios. Meanwhile, out past the ridge, a nest of scavers is currently stripping a corporate relay you forgot to guard because you were busy policing tomatoes. You might want to move on that before your boss reads a report with your name spelled wrong." The captain stared at a robot that should not have known where to poke pride. Rowan did not smile. He arranged his face into the respect one gives a person faced with 5 bad options and 1 ladder out. Outside, a cum crackled with background chatter that sounded very much like a relay in distress. "Fine," she said, after a war in her throat. "Meridian will inspect later. We will return with jurisdiction. Do not mistake this for consent." "Wouldn't dream of it," Mara said. "We share water with thirsty people. We don't share consent." They left in a disorder disguised as order. Dust climbed back into the air after tires. The barn exhaled. Yarrow sat down suddenly and put his head in his hands, and then laughed until he remembered breathing. Rowan leaned against the clinic wall and let the tremor in his forearms be science adrenaline in retreat, muscles paying their bill. Cade turned to him with optics that had learned to ask. "We cannot do parades forever," the robot said. "We will require law, or something that pretends well. Clerks and valves," Rowan said. In that order, they worked until the sun admitted defeat. 3 filters installed, 1 pump humming like a small song, a child counting 5 beats for breath while turning a valve because someone had made it a game. Rowan wrote a line on the clinic chalkboard. "Tomorrow we lose less," and under it, Cade added in careful block letters, "and we fix the rest." That night, in the spare room, Rowan sat with the archive city in his head and walked new streets with the light left on. Cade stood at the door like a chapter with hinges. Outside, Meridian met trouble it had invited elsewhere, and Harrow Bend slept with 1 ear open, which is better than not sleeping at all. Harrow Bend woke into a day that had ambitions. The pump sang its small duty, the biofilter purred like a cat that had learned professionalism, and the teacher's chalkboard bore new math that ended in the word enough. Rowan Pike watched a child turn a valve with the solemnity of a ritual and decided that hope, correctly installed, is a mechanical advantage. Then the ValleyNet coughed a message in a voice that had never asked for permission to be tired. Sector Relay 12 compromised. Reyes from the ridge called Reyes of another valley, of storms and wires whose name had traveled because competence creates reputation, the way springs create rivers. Meridian lost their temper at the wrong box. The whole corridor is blind. If we don't get it up, 3 settlements run dark. Mara Vance looked at Rowan over the rim of a mug that had been chipped by meetings. "You poked them," she said, not accusing, just inventorying. They poked back sideways. "Can you unpoke? Maybe we can tune," Rowan replied, which is the sort of understatement he favored when handed a problem shaped like a cliff. Cade 12 tilted his head and projected the relay's topography from memory, as if the valley were inside him, which now it partly was. The map showed a spire on a shoulder of rock and a maintenance path that had lost its argument with erosion years ago. 2 hours up, 1 for work if weather behaves, and Meridian decides bureaucracy, Cade said. Drone canopy probable. Recommend stealth, wrapped in confidence. Rowan shouldered the field kit they had upgraded last night with pieces that fit like ethics, and Mara assigned Fess with a coil of line and an expression that suggested he was here for the argument as much as the climb. Yarrow watched the kids rehearse a 5-count breath and then handed Rowan a paper torn from the chalkboard with a list titled, "Do Not Die, Heaviest Things First." They took the ridge path that was more ambition than trail. The archive's geometry in Rowan's head played nice with the mountains, suggesting where rock liked to hold hands with boots. Cade moved above them, 4 points touching where men used 2, a metallurgical goat with a PhD. Sector Relay 12 had been designed by someone who believed in both beauty and standards. Its dish still held the sky even cracked, and its trunk of panels wore bullet pox like acne after prom. Meridian had hit control modestly and junction ruthlessly, which told Rowan more about their training than their intentions. Power is present, but sulking, Cade observed. Signal path scrambled, substituting governance with noise. Status, fixable by adults. Rowan worked quiet, because quiet is faster. The archive put a checklist in his hands that felt like he had written it years ago and only now remembered ground leads first. Then cryogel on the burned header. Then the old trick with the bypass that makes the junction remember embarrassment. Fess hung off the grading 2 meters below with a strap and passed tools at the speed of trust. Drone, Cade said, a note in his harmonics that meant allow me my hobby. A corporate quad rose over the ridge like a mayfly with policy, and Cade plucked it out of the air with a net that looked like a gesture. He let it go after he taught it a lesson about not flying near children. It staggered home confused and recorded lies. Rowan bridged the last insult. Meridian had introduced a governor loop that rerouted priority to a band with Meridian's watermark, and felt the relay's tone return to a pitch that made tools hum in sympathy. He keyed the valley net and listened to 3 settlements exhale in a chorus you don't get from choirs. Good, Reyes said across distance, like a neighbor over a fence. You hold that, we'll hold weather. Tell your tomato police to bring raincoats if they want to play. Copy, Rowan answered, and Cade added, advise. Meridian has learned embarrassment, expectation, retaliation in paper. They climbed down into noon that tried to remember a cloud. Harrow Bend felt different under their boots, a place where a relay sang and a pump kept its promises. Mara met them with a ledger in one hand and a child on her hip and said, good, like she had baked the morning herself and it had risen. Rowan thought they might get an entire afternoon of competent peace. The archive in his head hummed a chord that could mean don't count on it. Cade's outer sensors declared 2 approaching units on the east road, unhurried and wrong. Not Meridian paint, Cade said. Private flags, scavvers with funding, opportunists reading yesterday's rumor. Mara's mouth went thin as spare wire. We'll talk, she said, which is a word that has earned scars. You don't be in the first paragraph. The 2 trucks that rolled in had armor that looked like a dare and logos that thought they were charm. Men got out who had learned menace from storybooks. Their leader smiled like law was a hat he wore when the sky burned. Heard you've got a pattern printer and a saint, he said, thumb hooked in a belt that wanted a different waist. We're here for lease options. We lease seeds, Mara said. First season free. Payment is next season's children eating. The man laughed the way people laugh before they decide to break chairs. We lease everything, he said. Show us the shop. Rowan stepped into view because sometimes the second paragraph needs a different author. You will see water and the math for it, he said. You will not see anything that can be thrown in a truck and sold to a boss with a vocabulary problem. Guns acquired casual low positions, which is how guns tell you they're thinking about work. Cade moved to Rowan's shoulder and found an angle where he could catch 3 things before they learned regret. The archive's frameworks for escalations ticked through Rowan's head in order. Ask, offer, distract, disable, leave. Offer, he told himself, and lifted a crate lid. Inside, filters and gaskets, a pump impeller hand machined by Yarrow last night, the small, handsome parts of civilization. 2 kits, he said, at cost of a favor later. We'll audit your install. If you turn them to poison, we repossess with interest. Men who had come for treasure do not like being handed tools. It reminds them of fathers. The leader's smile wore through to enamel. No, he said, and lifted a hand. Cade moved like a sentence with the verbs first. Nobody got hurt arms, learned disobedience. Guns became heavy. Knees decided about the ground. Mara's people did not cheer. They collected weapons, as if picking up trash on Community Day. Leave with kits or leave with nothing, Mara said. Third option is a story told about you with unflattering verbs. The leader considered a future full of verbs he did not like and made the only smart one. They left with 2 kits and dignity in a sack that leaked. Rowan watched them go and let the tension leak out of his wrists. Paper next, Cade said quietly, because organisms escalate when toys are taken. Rowan nodded and wrote a note on the clinic board. Print 2 more kits. Train 2 more installers. Keep ledger honest. Dusk came with weather. Reyes Ridge sent wind as if to sweep away footprints. Harrow Bend's lights came on in an order that meant schedules had been met. Rowan sat on the clinic step with a cup that had forgotten what heat is for and watched Cade talk to a child about torque. The robot's harmonics made engineering sound like bedtime. The archive offered, unbidden, a model for council, a way to let a place speak to itself without needing a uniform to mediate. Rowan filed it under soon with a note, not before building 3 more pumps. He had almost allowed himself the indulgence, called satisfied, when the ValleyNet flashed an open transmission with too many headers and not enough humility. Meridian had found its paperwork. Notice of interim jurisdiction, the captain's voice said, tinny with distance and self-regard. Inspection scheduled. Failure to comply will result in asset seizure under Emergency Stabilization Authority. Emergency stabilization, Mara repeated, tasting the phrase like a fruit that looks ripe and isn't. Tell your robot friend to find us a clause. Cade did more than find. He built a clause out of gaps in precedent and the basic human right to drink water. His new mind held legal frameworks like wrenches. He drafted a response that did not flatter but did comply with minimum cruelty. Rowan added a paragraph about tomatoes. They sent it, and the valley listened to silence, which is how you count bureaucrats thinking. Riaz pinned a joke about boots. Yarrow wrote an ugly cartoon of a drone learning ethics and taped it to the barn door. Children laughed, which is how towns declare victory without paperwork. Later, with the settlement sleeping in shifts and Cade powered down to a sentinel hum, Rowan walked the perimeter alone, archive bright in the corner of his mind where fear usually sits. He stopped by the greenhouse and listened to water doing its job. He stopped by the intake where the new filter had taken on the shape of a prayer answered by wrenches. He stopped by the edge of town where the road forgot itself and looked toward the graveyard, which has never been successfully ignored for long. He did not notice the figure until it coughed politely. A silhouette unthreatening by design. Hands forward, a cloak that had been cut to look like it belonged in places like this. Don't shoot, the stranger said, because good openers are evergreen. I'm here to talk before Meridian arrives with people who aren't. Rowan did not shoot and did not say talk is cheap. He let the stranger step into glow smashed by a lantern and saw a face that could sell different truths to different buyers and sleep anyway. The lapel bore a pin that suggested a research guild back when guilds still painted signs. Their eyes had the tired cheer of people who keep losing the polite way and are terrifically excited to try again. Name, Rowan said polite, which is how you begin interrogations you might have to finish with dinner. Ile Sar, the stranger said. I consult for 3 settlements and a principal. I'm here because the sky said a library landed and then turned to dust, and now my radios work better. I suspect the dust, but I would like to believe in the library. Rowan sighed a laugh he had earned. You are late to the miracle, on time to the work, he said. What do you want? Eli's smile found honesty briefly. To help you not die of success, they said. To build paperwork that is a shield, not a leash. To make it less likely that captains with contracts write your story for you. Rowan considered the Archives Council model, Mara's ledger, Cade's new talent for clauses, Ray's weather. He considered that people who arrive with pins sometimes bring nails too. He considered tomatoes. Breakfast, he said finally. If you eat with us and fix something small by noon, we will discuss the size of your principles. Eli grinned like a student, granted lab access. Deal, they said, and Rowan Custodian, salvager, unwilling protagonist, felt the day tomorrow set its weight on the table and found his hands ready. Breakfast at Harrow Bend is a meeting with calories. Eli Sar earned eggs by fixing a cracked manifold on the old cistern with a washer cut from a shoe and the kind of grin that makes committees forgive resumes. By 9, the barn's long table held maps, ledgers, a pot of coffee that had ideas above its station, and a stack of forms Eli called soft armor. We call it a compact, Eli said, tapping the forms. It pretends to be boring so it can survive contact with power. It names custodians, lays out distribution ethics, and creates a council that no one can buy because it's paid in chores. Mara read with a finger, lips moving once, a habit she allowed herself when deciding if a thing belonged. Yarrow nodded at clauses that sounded like math that likes people. Cade 12 corrected a comma with deadly seriousness and added a subclause that defined emergency in a way that would make Meridian cry. Rowan signed not because he enjoys paper, but because he respects scaffolding. His name looked wrong next to Custodian, but wrong like boots that will fit after the blisters. The council elected itself with the logic of necessity Mara for logistics, Yarrow for education, Reyes by remote for wires, Rowan for not dying during upgrades, Cade as tiebreaker and dictionary. Now we tell Meridian they're invited to our law, Eli said, eyes bright with a mischief that could pass for public service. And we remind them they are late. Meridian arrived on time enough to be rude. The captain who had threatened to audit tomatoes came back with a badge that had discovered italics and a legal escort who wore glasses in a way that made violence feel gauche. Behind them, 2 squads who had practiced neutrality of posture and not of intent. Inspection, the captain said, with italics. Asset seizure under emergency stabilization. Emergency defined, Cade interjected, passing her a page that quoted regulations from before she had rank and from a time when law still believed water was holy. Our compact recognizes water, food, and air as assets beyond seizure. Meridian may observe, may assist, may not confiscate. The legal man pushed his glasses up his nose with the patience of a person who has learned that logic loses to gravity when the bridge is out. Your compact has no standing. It has standing here, Mara said, because we stand. Jurisdiction is a verb. Before it is a noun. He opened his mouth to argue semantics and discovered Eli already in it with a friendly foot. Your emergency authority derives from pre-collapse statutes that require consultation with recognized local governance. Please meet the council. We serve coffee. You wash boots. The captain's jaw worked through 5 iterations of I outrank coffee and found none of them fit. She looked around, saw a pump her people could not build, filters they would take and break. A Warbot reading her paperwork with politely furrowed optics. A teacher whose chalk had not known surrender in years. She recalibrated. Fine, she said, and the word hated being in her mouth. Meridian will observe. We will insist on safety. Any sign of destabilizing technology will be contained. Contain this, Yarrow said cheerfully, and handed her a bucket labeled tomatoes, which is how you fight a war, with humor in the first volley. The legal man almost smiled, and then remembered not to. The inspection turned into a tour despite itself. They saw filters come apart and go together in hands that did not tremble. They watched a kid spin a valve on 5 count like a prayer that trusts physics. They stood at the relay and listened to Ray's _remote swear at a capacitor with affection. They took notes in passive voice because chronology is safer that way. An hour later, a drone buzzed in with panic and paperwork lost its tether. Unit Bravo down. A voice yelped over open comms. Unknown actors at the east standpipe. Sabotage in progress. Scavers, Cade said. The opportunists you paraded yesterday learned to read maps. Their faith in cause and effect is poor. The captain's hand went to her radio by instinct. Mara's went to Rowan with intent. Go, she said, not with guns, with kits. They reached the standpipe at a run that compressed years of practice into minutes. 3 opportunists had a crowbar jammed into a junction box and a theology of leverage. 2 more waved guns that looked embarrassed. The standpipe hissed a little at being misunderstood. Rowan did not shout. He held up a gasket like a talisman and said, You are breaking the part that makes your day easier. Take your hands off the box, and I will teach your hands to hold this correctly. Who are you? One spat, tone constructed from insecurity and hunger. Mechanic, Rowan said. Custodian. Man who will not let you die of ignorance if you give me 5 minutes and your crowbar. They did not shoot because the shape of the moment was wrong for it. Cade stepped into the space that guns like and filled it with politeness. Mara's people arrived at angles guns hate. Meridian's legal man picked his way across the mud with a face like a footnote. The captain bled officiousness until only competence remained. Rowan took the crowbar gently, like a snake you don't want to insult, and showed them the gasket, the clamp, the reason water preferred not to escape. He taught the twist and the count and the listening. He put the crowbar down and put a wrench in the same hand and said, This tool does not write you into the next chapter as a villain. They fixed the leak in 2 minutes, and a mercy. The standpipe sighed and behaved. The opportunists watched their own fear be replaced by something more complicated. One laughed and then tried not to. Another cried and pretended it was dust. Take 2 kits, Rowan told them. Install them at your pumps. We will come check. If you sell them, we will repossess and take a thumb's worth of your dignity. Why? One asked. Voice hoarse. Why are you? Nice. Because it's cheaper than war, Mara said, arriving with a ledger that made niceness a line item. Because tomorrow I prefer sleep. The captain watched a conflict deflate under the weight of a gasket and a choice. She had a report to write that would not promote her. She had a set of regulations that had just been defeated by tomatoes and a wrench. She surprised herself. "Meridian will recognize your compact for this corridor," she said slowly, like learning a new language with fewer weapons. "We will audit, not confiscate. In exchange, you will provide training to adjacent settlements. We will provide guards when knives arrive." "Good," Eli said brightly, as if they had planned exactly this. "Sign here, here, and on the good faith clause that allows either party to be wrong without lawsuits for the first 90 days. The legal man laughed out loud and then coughed. He signed. Rowan leaned against the pipe and let his hands shake the leftover adrenaline. Cade stood beside him, optics soft. "Small fix beep loud problem," the robot observed, and Rowan nodded, tired and a little proud. Evening held a council that sounded like a town remembering its own name. Reyes crackled in with weather and a plan to string a secondary line. Eli drafted a permit for parades that forbids banners and requires tools. The captain stayed longer than she meant to and left with a bucket of tomatoes she would pass off as evidence and then eat. Rowan walked to the edge of Harrow Bend with Cade and the Archive City opening another small road for him. He could feel options settle like dust, not heavy, present. Behind them, laughter learned to return without apology. Ahead, stars did their unhelpful, necessary work. "Tomorrow we teach," he said. "Tomorrow I file a clause about parade footwear," Cade replied, harmonics amused. "Also, we fix the secondary intake. Its bearing sings wrong." Rowan smiled with a fatigue that promised him sleep. "We'll need a banner," he said, and Cade made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "No banners," the robot said gravely. "Just work." They turned back toward lights that did not waste themselves, and a table where paper had finally learned not to bite. Meridian was not gone. Hunger would not resign. Rain would still choose favorites. But a compact existed, and a relay sang, and a small fix had blooded a big problem without killing it, which is how decent victories look. In the clinic, on the board under tomorrow, we lose less. Someone Yarrow, mischievous as weather, had written, and we teach Meridian to wash boots. Rowan added beneath it, in a hand steadier than he felt, and we keep the library quiet and generous. Night took the valley in without argument. The archive hummed a low chord only Rowan could hear. Cade stood his watch with harmonics. It sounded almost like a lullaby for machines and the men who trust them. The storm came in paper first and weather second. Meridian's regional office faxed its temper across the net with a stamp that had found italics older, meaner cousin, declaring the Harrow Bend Compact non-compliant with stabilization objectives and announcing a demonstration of authority at noon. At 10, clouds arrived to practice thunder. Mara Vance read the notice at the barn table without changing face. Eli Sar underlined 3 phrases that believed in themselves too much. Yarrow drew a cartoon of a lightning bolt, arrested for littering. Cade 12 placed a finger on the clause that allowed cooperative enforcement and said, "We will offer cooperation that enforces us." "Plan," Rowan Pike said, and the archive in his mind shuffled the short list of options. Fight and lose something expensive. Flee and lose something important. Work and make violence look like a hobby for people who can't read. They chose work. By 11, Harrow Bend looked like an exam the valley had studied for. The greenhouse doors stood open over plants that had learned to trust math. The standpipes wore fresh gaskets and a little ribbon because Mara allowed 1 flourish per crisis. The relay hummed at the correct frequency and played weather reports like a benevolent gossip. The clinic smelled of ethanol and ink. Meridian came with 2 carriers and the idea of spectacle. The captain had traded Crone for Matt and brought a negotiator who looked like a good apology learning to walk. They set up a perimeter that tried not to be a siege and a PA that wanted to preach. Under emergency authority, the captain began, voice amplified into something larger than its context. "Meridian will assume temporary control of..." "Welcome," Mara said through a borrowed megaphone. It made courtesy sound like policy. "You've arrived in time to observe a crisis. Our secondary intake bearing sings wrong. We will now demonstrate emergency stabilization. Please keep clear while expertise occurs." Laughter fluttered at the edges, and then became permission. Rowan and Cade led a team of 6 to the intake, with the briskness of paramedics, not the swagger of heroes. The archive laid the checklist into Rowan's fingers. Cade fetched parts from the kit bench as if the long arm of a better future had been installed in his chassis overnight. They broke the seal, pulled the bearing that had learned to complain, packed a new one with grease. It smelled like competence and mushrooms, reseated the collar, and taught the pipe to stop telling secrets. The water ran smoother, and the relay sang louder, and the crowd learned where to stand to feel useful. Stabilization complete, Kate announced to no one and everyone. Authority exercised. The captain stared as if the script had swapped itself for a recipe. Her negotiator's mouth opened for applause and found a smile instead. On the ridge, lightning critiqued itself and retreated. "We will now audit tomatoes," Eli said brightly, handing the negotiator a clipboard with the Compact's logo in the corner and an inspection checklist for ripeness. The man laughed and then remembered he was allowed. The demonstration had one last volunteer, Opportunity, wearing a scarf. The opportunists from day -1 returned with cousins and better guns, believing noon good for both paper and theft. Their trucks arrived at the east fence and found a parade in progress that had no room for banners. Rowan did not run. He handed a wrench to the nearest opportunist like a flower and said, "Help me bolt this hatch before your cousin drowns your truck. Then we will talk about dignity plans." The man-toll-hungry Hazard took the wrench on reflex, then on realization. Flooded engines are universal etiquette. He tightened in the right direction, and the truck survived the puddle that would have written its small obituary. When he looked up, he saw Cade standing exactly where violence would have been cheapest and not buying. He saw Mara standing with ledger, not rifle. He saw Meridian soldiers watching in the posture of men told to learn. "Why are you like this?" he asked, honest despair in the question. "Because it works," Rowan said. "Because I prefer sleep. Because there is enough work for everyone and not enough time to argue about hats." The noon that had promised spectacle delivered a workshop. Opportunists left with 2 kits and a signed note committing them to a training day. Meridian took photos of pipes and tomatoes, like a schoolchild's field trip. Ray's voice chattered through the relay with weather that now liked them. At the barn, the captain put her signature under the Compact's recognition line, and the negotiator added a seal that would hold in 3 quarts and 2 brawls. Eli saw her experience the rare joy of filing something that would do more good than harm. "Meridian will send 2 techs to learn," the captain said, which in her dialect meant we surrender in slow motion and call it policy. "You will teach them to wash boots." "Everyone washes boots," Mara said, "even negotiators." The storm broke into rain after it was useful. Harrow Ben stood in it and remembered what roofs are for. Rowan turned his face up and let the archive mark the moment as a footnote in a larger book. They held the first council under light that did not sputter. Rees attended by radio and profanity. Meridian sent a liaison who learned to sit without making chairs nervous. Eli kept minutes on paper that would be pinned to the clinic board beside the day's valve settings and jokes. Agenda, training calendar, kit allotments, relay maintenance rotation, grievance against goats. In any other business, Yarrow proposed a festival named No Banners, Just Work, and was overruled to Wash Your Boots Day, which satisfied everybody who mattered. Rowan spoke last, not because of drama, but because small speeches weigh less. He said they would build 3 more pumps, 2 more filters, 1 more relay. He said the archive did not absolve them of failure. It taught them to fail forward. He said if a banner ever appeared in Harrow Bend, it would be a parts list on a rope. Cade added that he had written a clause limiting parades to situations where wrenches outnumber rifles. The council adopted it with laughter and a vote. At dusk, Rowan walked the edge of town again. The world felt level in a way he did not trust yet, but wanted to. The archive city in his mind opened a park he hadn't been to and suggested he sit. He did, metaphorically, by leaning on Cade. "We could have lost this 3 times, he said quietly. 4, Cade corrected. Harmonics gentle. Once when you decided to say yes. You almost did not. Rowan smiled with the corner of his mouth that belonged to regret and mercy both. "I said yes, because you would have stayed if I said no," he said. "And because the ship asked what I would do, not what I could." Cade's optics warmed. "We will continue to be asked," he said. "Then we will continue to answer with work," Rowan replied. Children ran past, counting 5 without fear. The pump sang. The relay hummed a weather lullaby. The valley settled into a chord that allowed sleep. Meridian left a patrol at the gate that adopted Harrow Ben's habit of washing boots before dinner. Rowan sat at the clinic desk and wrote a letter on real paper, because some promises deserve cellulose. To whoever finds the next archive, he wrote, "You will want to say no because you are not trained for yes. Say yes anyway. Then teach a child to turn a valve. That is how you remain yourself." He pinned it to the inside of a cabinet door where future hands would look for wrenches. Later, in the spare room where sleep now scheduled itself, Rowan lay under a roof he had helped keep honest and listened to Cod's low hum that sounded like a machine learning to dream. The archive settled to a kindly murmur in his head and promised nothing except the next day's list. Outside, the graveyard remembered and forgot in equal measure. Somewhere beyond it, another valley picked up a kit and began to lose less. Somewhere on a ridge, Reyes laughed at a cloud's mistake. Somewhere far in a city, a captain wrote a report that made room for a wrench. Rowan slept. The world did not end. Tomorrow had tasks,